It turns out that the far right now owns almost all of Western cultural capital. Almost all of
This
it.
is news to me, I have to say.
Yeah, for years, I thought the far right owned nothing. And, when they were like, oh, you're far right, it's like, okay, what does that mean? Well, that means now that I enjoy things and live a wholesome life and I work hard and I try to raise my children in a good and noble way and I make sure that they've got food on the table. And that all makes me far right.
Ah.
And so the far right, I'm just thinking, well, why are people so down on the far right? Like, seems that it has everything that's good.
Well, I often joke about myself, a classic liberal Tory. I think taxes are a bit too high. I think 15-minute cities are a load of cobblers. I think net zero is bonkers.
Welcome to the far right, Helen.
I think that, we need to build more houses so that young people can afford to live in one. This makes me far right, apparently.
Do you occasionally enjoy reading Shakespeare?
Oh, I do.
Did you like Sharp?
Apparently, oh goodness me! I watched Ken Clark's Civilization twice on
Wow.
the BBC and on the ABC in Australia. Those two organisations must also be far right.
Actually, that's exactly what Preventive declared. So before we start, I just want to go through the work we have done on Lotus.com, talking about traditionalism and fascism, because I think this is important because the term far right is, of course, wildly nebulous. What it is not progressive. That's what they're aiming for. And so we've done a lot of work. Here's the latest piece on the symposium in which Stelios and Harry talked about Carl Schmitt, who's, of course, the sort of Nazi philosopher, and how his view of anti-liberalism. I did a piece on the origin and doctrine of fascism. I read Zeev Sternhell's Neither Left Nor Right, talking about the genealogy of fascism. Sorry, you can go along, John. So that's Giovanni Gentili's Origin and Doctrine of Fascism.
I do recommend, if you're going to read a Nazi,
I'm not
read Schmitt. Don't try to read Heidegger. Heidegger is just incomprehensible.
Yes.
Schmitt was not a boring general sort of philosopher. He was a legal philosopher.
Yeah.
And like the critical race theorists, as you discovered, we had this chat on Twitter the other day, as you discovered, because he was trained as a lawyer, lawyers have to write clearly, because we're all trained, everybody is, who does an undergraduate law degree, you're trained to write a client advice. And the basis for client advice is that this person is not a lawyer, so they have to be able to understand it, which is why from the left, the critical race theorists write perfectly clear prose, so you know exactly what they mean. And from the right, Carl Schmitt writes perfectly clear prose. And if you read him, you will know what he says, you will understand exactly what he's getting at, and then you are in a position to disagree.
Yes. Yeah. But the origins and doctrine of fascism is actually, from a philosophical point of view, it's coherent. It's just bonkers. This is where the term totalitarianism comes from. I've talked about this quite a lot. I made a video a while ago in which I argue that fascism is the inevitable conclusion of socialism, frankly, because I think it is. And I think there's a reason that all the fascists were socialists first. We can get to the next one, John. I covered Zeev Sternhell's Neither Left Nor Right, which he talks about the intellectual genealogy of fascism, where it came from, Italian syndicalism and French socialism, which seems to be something that you can't really contest. It's obviously come from there. And so this is what have we got to do with the right wing at this point? And by comparison, I've done a lot of work on Scruton and Burke. If you go to the next ones, John. Go to the next one. Sorry. So Roger Scruton is just one of the many things that we've done on him. And Burke's Reflections on the Revolution of France, which of course is one of those texts that you read if you want to get a good sort of overview of what the sort of
old Whig liberal Toryism, basically the old Whig,
how traditionalism is valuable, right? And so after reading and studying all of this, I've come to the conclusion that fascism and traditionalism are not just not the same thing; they are in fact opposite things. They operate in totally separate and different ways. Fascism is a form of revolutionary socialism in one nation. Traditionalism is the organic accumulation of cultural goods over time. Fascism is happy to restructure society for an a priori goal.
Revolutionary. It's got the shares revolutionary quality.
Exactly. Whereas traditionalism is, of course, the opposite of that. It can't be revolutionary. It can make small adjustments, but never revolutionary changes. And so the method is totally different, even if the aesthetics are similar. So they're totally different things. So calling both of these things far right means that the term far right actually has very little real worth.
It empties out the term far right. It's the same problem with collapsing, and I have to say it happens on the left as well, wokery into Marxism.
Yes.
Yes, they have aesthetic similarities, and yes, they both use that oppressor-oppressed dyad. But one of the reasons why some of the loudest complaints about wokery is coming from people who are actually historically had genuine roots in Marxism is because, no, you don't. You are literally... Imagine me picking up the glass of water and taking our politics and just tipping it out on the carpet. It's the same thing.
Oh yeah, one of the main complaints I see from actual modern Marxists is that essentially what woke does is gives cover to the bourgeoisie to claim they're a part of an oppressed proletariat by saying, well, look, I may be an owner of the means of production, but I'm also transgender, and therefore I'm part of the oppressed.
Yes.
And it's like, well...
And it's actually a fair point.
It is actually a fair point, actually.
It's a fair point, because the one thing, I mean, Marxism is full of a litany of errors, but the very, very basic early point, which was really... It's not just Marx. I mean, you get this in Polanyi and Engels and other sort of Proudhon and other proto-socialist writers, is that life is actually pretty shit if you don't have any money.
Well, you get that from conservative writers as well.
As well, yes.
You know.
Well, that's the whole Disraeli, the cloth cap and top hat alliance against the Liberals. That's the beginning of one nation Toryism.
Yeah. And so, you know, there's ironically more in common with the conservatives on that issue with the Marxists than there is with, you know, the fascists, I suppose we'll just call them. But this is a fairly worthless term that I feel is being bandied around far too much, especially as I found this from 2019, an overview of the far right. Guess who's in here? Me.
Oh, I'm in there.
Here. Yeah, if you can do a quick search for my name, John.
Oh, dear Lord.
Well, everyone's in here. It makes the far right, you know... It associates people with us who I just don't think are interesting or worthy of being associated with us. So Paul Joseph Watson, yes. Me, Milo, Dankula, Tommy Robinson. Then you got like other people who, like, you know, the Paul Golding from Britain First and things like that. It's like, but these people have wildly divergent views.
Anne-Marie Waters is actually an old socialist.
Yeah.
This is the thing. She's kind of the spiked type crew. I mean, this is someone who cannot tell the difference between different political traditions. I mean, honestly, one of the things that I say in my Peace for Law and Liberty on Nicola Sturgeon is I make a reference to the intellectual swamp that is the modern university. And the thing is, when I was a child, I'm long in the tooth now. This is what happens when you get old. But I went to my first year at university was in 1990, and one of the subjects I did, because I did arts law, as you call it in Australia, and I did the liberal arts qualification, which is literally just there so that you can provide good conversation at parties. No one's ever going to, if you study law, no one's ever going to do political science. You go off and become a lawyer and make money. But I did a subject called Modern Political Ideologies, where great care was taught in the teaching of this subject to make sure that you didn't mix up socialists with syndicalists or anarchists with communists, this kind of thing. This is like very, very basic political science that is not hard. You can learn it in a few months, and you don't even need to read whole books by Marx or Mill or any of these people. You can just read extracts and you won't make these kind of stupid errors.
You know, Bertrand Russell has a small book called Proposed Roads to Freedom, in which he very deftly, and it's only about 30 pages long. It's a very, very small little book. But he just goes through the early 20th century strains of these ideologies and just explains clearly what the difference between a fascist and socialist and an anarchist and a syndicalist is. He's just very clear about it and says, look, he's not really in favour of any of them, if I recall correctly, because it's like, they're all a bit flawed.
Weird, yeah.
But he just explains it in relatively clear terms, and it's a very small book, and it would explain all of these things to the people writing this. But apparently Dr. Benjamin Lee has no idea. He hasn't got an adequate definition for far right.
I'm sorry, there's a joke in there because he's got a PhD. And I've got a mental image of bog roll, I'm afraid, and rip, please take one with PhD written on it.
Anyway, so I thought we'd just then go and find out what the far right actually consists in then. And our good friends at The Guardian have told us that actually, well, being clean, that's a right-wing view. Do you like being clean? You're definitely right-wing. But to be honest with you, considering what we've seen from the left, I'm inclined to agree with them. I think they might be right.
What they're trying to do is use Jonathan Haidt's research.
Yes, in part.
Yeah, they're trying to
Well-
use his research
well-
to draw distinctions between conservatives and
Well,
progressives.
actually, this came from Jonas Olofsson, the co-author of the research from Stockholm University, and he said, "We think authoritarian attitudes might, at least in part, be rooted in biology, as in the biological drive to not be infected with diseases." Okay, I mean that's fine. I'll take it. Yeah, I'm right wing because I don't want to be disgusting. Yes, okay. Next is fitness, of course. Go to the
Oh,
gym.
goodness, yes. This has come up recently. I've got some friends who are into this. They call it tonic masculinity, or tonic. I don't know how they say it because they're Americans and I've not spoken to them verbally. But one of the things they advocate, and they've got various Substacks and blogs and things like that, is that people should go to the gym and people should get healthy and fit and so on and so forth.
Yep.
And they do coordinate to a degree, although they also, one of them's a personal trainer, one of the ones that that I subscribe to his Substack anyway, and so he mainly puts out like personal training type advice, and they all linked to this extraordinary article, supposedly from a conservative in America, although American conservatism I do find very, very strange because they're trying to defend what is a liberal project.
Yes, they are.
And it's not liberal in the sense of old Whig Burkean liberalism. It's a genuine revolutionary project, so it doesn't kind of work. But anyway, from this magazine criticising people for going to the gym. And then during the course of the article, this bloke actually disclosed that he runs 4 times a week and is actually quite fit. And so it was all a load of cobblers, really. But he was just, it was this whole thing of, no, don't bother doing this. It's fine to be fat, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm going, that was in a conservative publication. No, it's not fine to be fat.
Well, apparently,
I mean, I got overweight during lockdown, and I then realised I'd got overweight during lockdown, and I went and did something about it and lost a lot of weight.
you could have converted to left-wing beliefs and been like, "No, it's
I'm going to be a beached whale." Yeah. And can I tell you that it's much more pleasant to live life when you're 20 kilos lighter?
I know it personally.
Yes,
I know it
it's
personally.
just much. And I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm too old to sort of be some kind of catwalk model or anything like this, but it's just much better to be physically capable and not fat and to fit in train seats and all of those things. Just honestly,
It's just better for you.
go
It's a
to
bit-
the gym.
Yeah.
Lift.
Well, researchers from Hope Not Hate have detected that makes you part of an online network of fascist fitness groups.
I must tell my personal trainer this.
He's probably already in them.
He's Spanish and he votes for Podemos. I mean, this is the thing. It's ridiculous.
Anyway, the next thing that's part of the far right is universities. Apparently, it's ascendant on college campuses. I am mildly sceptical about that. But they
I think
say...
a pig just flew past my window.
Yes. They say, over time, the work of student movements has been folded into the corporate structure of the institution. This is well known. Yet most are likely unaware of a new phenomenon occurring across college campuses, in which far-right organisers have sought to use them as a place for contestation, recruitment, and protest and counter-protest. Ooh. Well, that sounds scary.
They don't, I mean, this is obviously, I don't pay as much attention to the United States, but they're just furious about Chris Rufo being put on the board
Yes.
in that one of the
Yes.
Florida universities.
Yes.
And I'm
God
sorry,
save
this
Chris
is,
Rufo.
look, one of the things with the way, one of the few ways that conservatives can stop O'Sullivan's law from happening, or conquest law, which is that if an organisation isn't explicitly conservative, it will become left-wing over time. One of the few ways you can arrest this is just appoint Tories to boards. And Rishi Sunak's done this a bit, Boris did it a bit, and now obviously DeSantis is doing the same thing. And I'm sorry, as far as I'm concerned, if Tony Blair and all the Labor people could happily appoint all their Blairite friends to run the National Trust or whoever it is, then the Conservatives can do exactly the same thing while they're in office, and you can just go and cry about it as far as I'm concerned.
The Conservatives should do it.
Oh,
Not they could,
absolutely.
They should. In fact, it's an imperative. So God bless Chris Rufo and good.
Ron DeSantis for doing this.
Absolutely. Legislate harder. Anyway, so moving on, they also have the intellectual dark web, Jordan Peterson, that Rolling Stone was complaining about. Oh, look at these figs. Oh, the far right Ben Shapiro.
Right. Oh, and there's the little green frog again. I
Hmm.
mean, dear Lord.
So okay, that's fine. So what are the worldviews of Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro? Well, self-help, look after yourself, clean your room, bucko, take responsibility. That's where meaning in life is found. Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson obviously both being parents. Peterson's probably a grandparent at this point. Very famous, successful, well known for promoting hard work and diligence. Terrible, absolutely terrible. So what else does the far right care about? Well, as far as the CBC is concerned, freedom. The concept of freedom is a far right rallying cry. Not
I've
wanting
just not been paying attention to this, but it is absolutely bonkers.
freedom from government oppression is the far right at this point.
That gets all the libertarians as well, then.
It does, yes.
And
exactly
libertarians
right.
are kind of weird because they're neither right nor left. They're sort
Yeah,
of all over the place.
yeah.
All right, so you're far right as well, libertarian.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, because you don't want to be locked down in perpetuity by the government arbitrarily. Fair enough. The next thing is protecting children from rapey migrants, which, I mean, Liverpool is...
Well, it's okay. I called them nonces on
Yes.
national television, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
So, and I stand by it, even though poor Mike Graham had to apologise afterwards because apparently that's a boo word with Ofcom.
Oh, is it?
Yes, it is. Mike
didn't
told
know
me
that.
afterwards, and we were talking about it.
Right.
And there's a very, very witty. You'll have to get it off his YouTube channel from the entertainer from Dominic Frisby.
Yes.
That is actually a song, and I think it's called the Ofcom song or something
Yeah,
like
it's
that.
brilliant,
You
yeah.
can get it
Yeah.
off of his YouTube channel anyway. And it goes through in an amusing and quite systematic way all the words that you can't say before the watershed on national television or national radio, and nonce is one of them.
Yes. So making sure that children don't get nonced by migrants is certainly one of them. This was, of course, Liverpool joining the ranks of the far right. 80% Labour voting Liverpool.
Yes, Tories are an endangered species in Liverpool.
Yeah.
I don't think there are many Tories up there.
No, but there are lots of far right people in Liverpool because they don't think that migrants should rape kids. Moving on, there are other far right protesters at the Tate Modern protesting Drag Queen Story Hour because they don't think children should be perverted either. So that's another far right canard.
Oh dear,
Don't
a lot of
pervert
those,
children.
a lot of those people will be feminists.
Yes.
That'd be a very interesting definition of far right.
Far right turfs.
Far right feminist, interesting.
Yes. J.K. Rowling, Liverpool, literally everyone a joining patriotic alternative, according to Hope 8. But the most interesting thing about this, I thought, was the list of cultural items that are far right now. This was a fascinating report that Douglas Murray got hold of from Prevent, the counter-terror scheme, which usually spends its time worrying about Islamic terrorism, because, of course, almost all terrorism that happens in Britain is Islamic terrorism. But this was fascinating. Helen, culturally, you are absolutely far right. You're probably the furthest right. I bet you enjoy Lord of the Rings, don't you?
Yes,
I bet you watched Sharp, didn't you?
yes,
Have you read George Orwell?
yes, all of them.
Yes. Have you?
And I watched Yes Minister, and
Yes.
I watched The Thick of It.
Yes. Sharp. Have you read Chaucer, Milton,
Yes.
Tennyson, Kipling, maybe a bit of Shakespeare? All of these have been declared far right pieces of media. Inexplicably, the Daily Mail tell us, it said the BBC's Great British Railway Journeys, presented by Michael Portillo, was far right.
I'm just visualising a cell conversation between a bloke saying, well, I got 20 years for murder. What are you in for? Well, I got 10 years for owning a copy of Great British Railway Journeys.
I mean-
Sorry, the jokes write themselves.
There's great quotes in here. It includes some of the greatest works of the Western canon, and in such cases, such as Joseph Conrad's The Secret Agents, powerful critiques of terrorism. Burke, Huxley, Orwell, and Tolkien were all anti-totalitarian writers. Yes, so the reason that I explained that we are well aware of the difference between traditionalism and fascism is because fascism is, of course, totalitarian. Explicitly, it coined the term. So to say that these things are far right is to say these things are not fascist. So when they say far right, they can't be talking about fascism, which is because fascism's far left. Anyway, the far right love Lord of the Rings. This is an article that was produced last week. Like, you would think this was something that was produced in 2013. Nope, this is a brand new article from Salon.com. They think that the far right wants to spend their time being a portly little person living in the Shire, smoking pipe weed, singing songs and drinking ale, and not being interfered with by the government. That's a very appealing framework for the far right.
That list is unironically a good list of things to read or watch, to be fair.
It's a great weekend, isn't it?
Well, more than a weekend,
Well, yeah,
because
yeah,
the Tolkien's not short, and nor is Chaucer, and the complete works of Shakespeare aren't either. I mean, this is bonkers.
This is the great literary canon of the
This
West.
is also, there's another thing, though, particularly when you're dealing with the comedies like The Thick of It and Yes Minister, and probably, I'm amazed Father Ted and the IT crowd aren't in there now, the IT crowd, because it's Graham Linehan who's a TERF. It's, you're not allowed to enjoy things.
Yep.
Whatever that cultural product is, and I don't particularly care because people do like different things, but it's this whole thing of you are not allowed to enjoy things. It's like those bizarre Guardian articles about you shouldn't own pets because it oppresses them, or this kind of thing. You are not allowed to enjoy the thing.
Yes.
You're not allowed to enjoy football and just have it be football. It has to be some other weird thing in addition to football, which of course is the whole point of it, is to drain the enjoyment out of it.
Yes.
These are people who want politics to colonise everything, and it just drives me bonkers.
So they say, what do conservative libertarians find so appealing about Tolkien's fantasy world? Well, the answer is no government to tell the free people what to do. There isn't really much government at all. Instead of bureaucratic committee, an independent coalition correctly decides to send a fellowship to destroy the One Ring and stop Sauron from establishing a dictatorship over Middle-earth. That's great advertisement for being far right. You want to be a fat hobbit and happy in the Shire, drinking and smoking, with the government not commanding every moment of your life with a bureaucratic committee? Join the far right.
Join the far right, become a hobbit. That's not a tagline I had on my bingo card.
It sells though, doesn't it? And
I become a hobbit. The only problem for becoming a hobbit for me, because I'm 6'1", is you need to chop me off at the waist.
You can be an honorary hobbit. The worst part about all of this, though, is of course that the far right control Twitter now, because Elon Musk bought Twitter, and he's put every lost young man on Twitter in the crosshairs of the far right. So the young men may be taught to be clean, to be healthy, to be upwardly mobile, to be personally responsible, to enjoy great literary works and go to university.
To lift.
The far right, ladies and gentlemen. The Guardian is paranoid that the far right is going to do all of these horrific things to young men. How could they? Awful. So the question is, she says, what can we do to protect young men from their influence? For those who have bartered their 20s for far-right approval, all we can do is hope that they get the much-needed support that it will take to improve their lives. So nothing. They have nothing. What are you going to do about the young men joining the far right? Nothing. We hate young men. Screw them. They're often white, cisgendered, straight. They work hard. We hate the young men. The young men have always been the problem. That's why we're stigmatizing them. Is it any wonder they're joining the far right?
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Brokenomics series, this one on Bitcoin. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.